now.
Okay.
Okay.
Alrighty. So yeah, I just finished a sit. Well, it started off as a sit, but then I was dealing with too much dullness, so I had to stand up and open my eyes, and it just wasn't going away. So keep ramping up the the antidote, and so I started walking. And then I started like, kind of like singing and just like really trying hard to ramp up the joy, because and it was a lot of effort. It was quite a bit of effort. If anyone else was in the room with me, they would have thought that I was a crazy person with my body movements and my voice and whatnot.
Well, it
Uh,
seems to have worked because you're in a good mood now.
yeah. No, it worked. So and then I sat for a few minutes after that. So that was my most recent sit. I had another sit this afternoon where there was a lot of aversion. Um, and the aversion was related to what felt like over efforting. I was trying, like, nothing seemed to be working when I would try to I would try to gladden the mind using techniques that had worked before, and they weren't working this time around. And so then I just kind of I somehow managed to do it. Anyways, I somehow managed to just get to a point where it's just like, you know what? Okay, like I'm just gonna be okay with this. Even though, I wasn't okay with it, but then I don't know, maybe I just like gave up. It's like, you know what? I'm just gonna be okay with this. And what was interesting then was it felt as if there was um, a background sort of joy and acceptance, and then that just I managed to somehow sink a little bit into that, and then it seemed to dissolve some of the aversion that was there. So that was nice.
Okay.
And then the last sit that I can remember of note was last night. And what was interesting about this one was um, the tranquilizing the body part seemed to be the I don't know, I guess like the focus or the most notable thing, where I seem to get to a place where uh, an image actually came to my mind of a faucet and water um, coming out of a faucet. And as long as this image was in mind, I was able to just really relax and let go of any sort of tension or dissatisfaction. And then I'd notice, like, when the faucet closed and it was back to like more dukkha, I was like, no, I'm gonna turn that faucet again. Uh,
Okay.
yeah. So those are probably, yeah, that's what I got. So
I have actually heard about the faucet and that concept
uh-huh.
as part of a guided meditation or a hypnotic induction.
Oh, okay.
So it seems to have value in that regard. Um, of imagining that all of the stuff that's stopped up
Mm-hmm.
inside, now we've got the faucet on, and all that stuff is just draining out, just
Mm-hmm.
flowing out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my association to it actually was when you're trying to pee, but you can't pee, and so you use like some warm water from a faucet to allow um, yourself to let go. That's what I was thinking it might have to do with, but yeah. Anyway.
Oh, it's a well-known thing about peeing in the shower. That the water of the shower is part of the just, wow, this feels so nice that everything kind of let
Right.
go
Yeah.
like that. Yes,
Yeah.
okay. Um, and that, well, actually, when I was much younger, on television, there would be a commercial, an Alka-Seltzer commercial that I remember. This starts with plop, plop, fizz, fizz. Oh, what a relief it is.
Okay.
And so you can use that because that's in fact what we're talking about, not necessarily Alka-Seltzer with plopping the Alka-Seltzer in the water and then it fizzes,
Mm-hmm.
but rather that sense of relief, that
Mm-hmm.
sense of letting go. Um, and that's basically what you were talking about in before. Rather than trying to make things better, we kind of let go into, okay, this is good enough.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, now that's the point that we're going for. Recollect and remember that, and work with that. Is that kind of letting go, so that we come to a point of relief, and that the way that we're going to develop that is also the relief that we have is something like after we've just completed a job. The job is well done, and we can just, all right.
Yeah.
Many examples of that. One would be sundown.
Mm-hmm.
And as the sun goes down, the plantation workers out in the field will set their bag of cotton down and sit on it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's just the day is over. I made it through the day, or in this case, the moment is over. I made it through the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of getting into a state of feeling okay
Mm-hmm.
and have the quality of a job well done.
Mm-hmm.
This is in fact what we're looking for. That job well done, it has both the quality of this particular moment, removing the hindrances, and then later the job well done in the sense of the recognition that the underlying tendencies that
Mm-hmm.
give rise to the hindrances are also now in compliance. And so there's a bigger job well done.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when the mind is noble, then the noble knows that the mind is noble. And in that regard, that's a job well done of getting the mind in the noble state.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me that there are two different activities where the first one is what you're talking about this sort of like just letting go and just accepting whatever uh, the moment is. But then there's also this second activity of not accepting the moment as it is and putting in effort in order to change the mind into something else.
Okay,
Um,
that can either be wisely done or foolishly done.
right.
Most of the time, it's done ignorantly and therefore foolishly. And by doing so, it tears us out of that state of satisfaction that, or that sense of relief that we had just created.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so now we become dissatisfied again. That's the nature of the mind. That's partly why it's called a monkey mind. And the idea is that the monkey is jumping from one tree branch to another, to another, to another. Now, why is the monkey out there jumping from branch to branch? Because he's not satisfied with the branch he's on.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that I guess is the way of rephrasing that old joke of why did the chicken cross the road?
Mm-hmm.
Because he was dissatisfied on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
But guess what? When he got across the road, he probably was still dissatisfied.
Mm-hmm.
So the story of why did the chicken cross the road? The answer is to get to the other side. We can say, well, that means that the crossing of the road was necessary or some job needed to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But when we get to the other side of the mind or the road or whatever, now we're satisfied. We can stop.
Mm-hmm. So I think
But what you're doing is turning around and saying, now I'm going to go cross the road again. And begin into a cycle of crossing the road.
Right. So I think one of the problems that I'm sometimes encountering is in this movement of trying to gladden the mind. Sometimes it feels like to in order to make that movement, it's like an effort that it like is maybe disingenuous or it feels like work.
Yeah.
But it's not always like that. It doesn't always feel that way. So I'm not sure if there's
Okay. So, by the way, I have heard this before said in different ways. One of the ways that I've heard it said is the student doesn't even know what joy is, or that every time that they try for joy, they feel like a failure at it.
Okay.
And yet, that's actually not possible. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talks about it in the sense of the little dhammanas and says that from time to time, everyone has a little dhammana where they take the load off, where literally the mind just shuts down for a second and they literally cool off. And that happens every day or sometimes several times a day. And yet the people are not aware of it because of they're not practicing sati, so they're not watching what the mind is doing. And so the mind just shuts off and then it starts back up. And then they don't even know that that period of time happened. So if that's the case, then what we're saying is that this state of joy that some people say they don't have is not true. They have to have this joy. If they hadn't, they would have, already had a heart attack or clutched themselves to death or whatever. They'd be dead if they had absolutely no joy. Or, like you're saying, that I can have joy, but oh, it's so much work. And by putting in so much work, it is no longer as rewarding as it would be if I didn't have to work at it so hard. Okay. Well, in both cases, one's working too hard and the other one is not working hard enough. There's a
Mm-hmm.
balance in there someplace. So the actual right effort, and the right effort is really based in the sati, in the sense that the wake up is to actually see the dissatisfaction in the mind, because being able to see that dissatisfaction is it's the first step. If you can't see the dissatisfaction in the mind, if you can't see the hindrances, then there's no possibility of any progress.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to begin to congratulate ourselves from seeing the stuff. An example which see the cow pie that you just stepped in. Just look at your foot and see you just stepped in the cow pie. That will help you not step in the next cow pie you're about to step in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in that regard, we need to keep practicing, but the it has to be practiced correctly in the sense of taking what joy we can find and be satisfied with that, even if it's just a minimum. That's it. I saw that.
Right.
Okay, that's satisfaction as opposed to being stuck in the dissatisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not talking about how big the satisfaction is, or how deep it is, or how superlative it is, or how we want to write a sonnet on how satisfied we are, but
Mm-hmm.
rather begin to be satisfied with the little satisfactions.
Okay.
To become
Mm-hmm.
satisfied with those, and this takes even more mindfulness, because you're not just you, but everyone is in a state of wanting things. That's
Mm-hmm.
why the that's why the chicken crossed the road.
Mm-hmm.
Was because he was dissatisfied on this side of the road, and he crossed the road to get to the other side because he wanted something, and when he got there, he was still dissatisfied.
Mm-hmm.
The Buddha had a story about a dog that he used as an example. Most dogs, and we've got several around here, spend a lot of time just laying. They love it, especially they go to the bathroom because the concrete floor in there is cool,
Mm-hmm.
and so they like to just lay in that room. But in the time of the Buddha, there was a point when the Buddha was there with some monks, and out to a little distance there was a dog who would lay down, and then he would spend a little bit of time scratching or whatever, and then he would get up and he would circle around the same spot over and over again, and then he would snip it, he would claw it, he would try back and forth, and then he would lay down in the same place. And he wouldn't stay there longer than a breath or two.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would start gnawing at something, and then he'd get up and maybe go in the other direction, but he'd circle that place all around and around and around, and then the dog would lay back down.
Mm-hmm.
And he kept repeating this thing that he would never lay down and stay laid down. He kept getting back up and circling the place that he was. Now, it's possible that that dog at that time had some rash or skin disease, mange or something. And
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a lot of really scroungy dogs when I was in India. And so I could imagine that all the dogs there would be like that. But then the Buddha says, this is the typical situation of the human mind, is that we can't just sit down in the mind and rest, that we have to get up and start spinning again.
Mm-hmm.
That's the nature of the mind. And it will start spinning until the dog, or the wise part of our mind, gets a load of that and says, wait a minute, you don't have to keep spinning the mind. You can lay down and rest. And that much of Anapanasati has the quality of two things. One is the quality of investigation,
Mm-hmm.
and then the other quality of passivity, or relaxing or letting it out. So step 4 of anapanasati is to pacify the body. Now, in some translations, that would be to tranquilize the body, but that word's got too many rifles and darts and kind of ideas in it that when you got tranquilized, then you've lost complete control. But that's not the case. So the word tranquilized is not the right way to look at it, but rather relaxed, contented, or satisfied. That doesn't mean that the posture is slumping. It just means that the body is in a relaxed state. Okay. But we also bring that about by being in a relaxed state of mind. It's only when the mind is in a relaxed state that the body can relax. But the mind is ultimately not going to relax until the feelings are relaxed. And so these are why these various stages are in anapanasati, each one of them a point of skill to be developed. But many people, when they do it in a formalized way, they think that they've got to tranquilize the body before they even begin to work on feelings. Is not the way. No, it doesn't work like that. The body is ultimately not going to become completely relaxed until the body-mind complex is relaxed. And that we actually use that feature to begin to understand the mind by looking at the body. Because when the mind is upset, it does so by throwing chemicals around. And a lot of the chemicals are thrown into the body in the sense to modify the breathing, to shut it off, to put adrenaline, cortisol, get ready for fight or flight, and all of that kind of stuff when one feels threatened. But that feels threatened mechanism actually is much more overactive than it needs to be. And the reason that it's overactive is partly because we were born with it, and that we in childhood had ample opportunities to keep that mechanism going. But the reality of the situation is the environment you find yourself in now is relatively safe, as it is for most people. For instance, with Corona-19, most of the world people are going stir crazy and are completely freaked out about the Corona-19. To in fact, because they're doing all the right things, wearing masks and keeping their distance and staying secluded, there's nothing to worry about. Especially right now, there's no danger. And yet, look how many people are responding to a state of danger inside. Huh? Why is that? Because they're in the habit of it. So that means that habit is going to get repeated over and over and over and over again. Our job as anapanasati practitioners is to sati in on that and begin to look at it, begin to see it. And by seeing it, we become more and more satisfied. Just the way the mind works. But you can also say to yourself, but it is such a relief to not have to think about those things. And by doing so, now we're not thinking about those. We're thinking about how much a relief it is to not think about them. In a way, what that means is that we were in that thought, we were of that thought, we were that thought, and now the sati, the wake up, is that we recognize, no, I was not that thought, that I am not that. We can draw out and see that that's just an old habit pattern, just an old way that I've been suffering, and that right now I'm not. I'm not suffering because I just saw that. So we begin to congratulate ourselves, and in that congratulations for actually doing it, that's part of the gladdening of the mind, is to see it as a success. Become successful at your meditation. Or a better word rather than meditation is merely practice,
Mm-hmm.
because we're not really meditating. What we're doing is we're practicing development of skills. And the word sita in this regard, sita bhavana, means mental development, but in this case, it's both uh, verbal part of the mind and the emotional part of the mind. But we're also with sati waking up
Mm-hmm.
and exercising the frontal cortex, the real part of the mind. So this verbal system that we have going, a set of concepts, ways that things should be done, etc. Freud labeled as the super ego, and that the more emotional system that we have is called the id. Now, Eric Berne calls the id the child ego state. The child is the one who, let us say, feels the brunt of the parent, and that the parent ego state, is built up over time. And it's all of the things that we should do, all of the orders that we've ever had to follow, all of the rules, all the oughts and shoulds. And so what happens is that people actually browbeat themselves by thinking about things that they should do. And then their child inside is hearing that and rebelling against it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the normal dialogue: is you ought to do this, no, I'm not, is the basic dialogue. You ought to go on a diet. Okay, I'll go on a diet until we get to the refrigerator door. And then you ought to be on a diet. No, I'm not. So this is the basic dialogue that we have inside, and that dialogue then can be called hindrance or the restlessness of the mind. You
Mm-hmm.
should do that. No, I'm not. You should do this. Okay, I'll do that. You should do that over there. Okay, and so we go from one plan based upon some old rule or some old should or ought to that comes out of the past. And
Mm-hmm.
this is the way that the mind has been trained, and so that's the way that it normally functions. However, when we catch it doing that, now we can say, "Oh, I don't have to do that. I don't have to be in that uh, dialogue between the verbal part of the mind and the emotional part of the mind. That they feed off of each other. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
that feelings cause thoughts, thoughts cause feelings. An example of that is the guy who gets angry. He can't think very well. That's been known throughout history. An example of gunfighters. If you're about to have an OK Corral or maybe high noon kind of gunfight, then the thing to do is to get your opponent upset, call him names or whatever like that. Uh, and so that's part of the dialogue that they have before they shoot at each other. Why? Because the one who's most upset is the one who is probably going to draw first in anger and miss his target. And
Mm-hmm.
he's also going to make movements. Okay, another example is that in debate, that they don't allow ad hominem attacks in formal debates, because that generally upsets your opponent and
Mm-hmm.
keeps him from being able to think straight. And there's physical stuff. If you can get somebody angry, what that means is all the blood is drained out of the brain into the body, ready to get a fight or flight thing going. And when we're uh, fleeing, we should have our wits about us, and yet the biological mechanism is not built that way. Or when we're fighting, we should be able to see things clearly. So staying calm in a desperate situation means actually that the brain is better able to function. So knowing this, when we're practicing sati, that means that we're going to continue to wake up and see what this dialogue is, to wake up and to see, how do I feel? What am I thinking? And making a choice about, is what I'm thinking right now worthwhile thinking or not?
Mm-hmm.
so that we can say, okay, if it's not worthwhile thinking, then I'm going to think of something that is worthwhile thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so we began to talk about that before,
Right.
but we can make that choice as long as we can continue to wake up.
Mm-hmm.
But that wake up process sometimes requires it, um, let us say, lickety split in order,
Mm-hmm.
because we'll wake up, we see what's going on, and immediately we go right back into hindrance. We need to be able to wake up to that too, so that we can actually keep waking up, so that we can take the right effort to come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Many beginning students experience that when they sit down um in the hall uh, to practice anapanasati. The first instruction is to be aware of the in breath and to be aware of the out breath, making sure that it's a long, deep breath.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the mind wanders away. When the mind wanders away and the student catches that the mind is not watching the breath, that it has wandered away, the first thing that they do is they say, "Oh no, monkey mind, all this stuff is so hard to do." All right? They become dissatisfied with the sati that they have just created, when in fact they became dissatisfied with the mind only because they saw it for the first time. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, but sometimes it's going to piss you off. Well, this is that piss off moment. And it's going to happen over and over and over again. So we need kind of a double wrap of sati. One is to wake up to what's going on, and then the next is to wake up to the fact that I don't like what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we have that kind of double dose of it, that's when it gets um, more improved, so that we do not allow the mind to remain in a state of dissatisfaction, even though we've caught it at the first glance. That we
Mm-hmm.
actually go to the point of gladdening the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And the gladdening of the mind is, oh, what a relief it is not to think about that stuff.
So, a major source of my dissatisfaction is having thoughts in, even if they're wholesome thoughts, just having thoughts is feels like a source of dissatisfaction.
Well, I will have to agree with that. But coming to the state of no thought um, is going to be a long process
Mm-hmm.
if you are dissatisfied with having thoughts.
Right. Yeah.
But if you are capable of, let us say, rather than having the mind in an open range
Mm-hmm.
with no fencing, we begin to fence it in. We begin to set boundaries, and then we make that boundary smaller and smaller, and
Mm-hmm.
eventually the mind or the horse can get put into not just a corral, but now into a stall.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but you're not ready to have the mind in a stall yet, because it still hasn't worked out the fencing yet out in the pasture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so with that regard, let us take great pleasure in fencing in the mind, at least into the boundaries between that which is wholesome and that which is unwholesome.
Mm-hmm.
Or let us put a fence in between the meadow and the desert, so that the mind doesn't spend any time in the desert, it just spends its time in the meadow. Later, we'll put another couple of fences in so that we close that meadow down.
Mm-hmm.
But in the beginning, we got to have that one line, that one fence in there, and that would be then one's right effort. The right
Mm-hmm.
effort is to maintain that boundary between what is worthwhile thinking about and that which is not worthwhile thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Because that which is worthwhile thinking about leads to satisfaction. If it's worthwhile thinking about, then you're going to be satisfied with those thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not satisfied with the thoughts you're having, then you're in the desert. Check that out. Come back into
Well,
having,
the thoughts that I'm having are pretty much, I'd say the vast majority of the time are revolving around the meditation. Um, and so I'm not really thinking about the past or the future, or
excellent.
it's I'd say like 98% of the time commentary about the present moment, and it gets annoying because it's like I just
Okay.
and I note it, I was like, oh, okay, this is a version. Let me take satisfaction in the fact that I'm noticing it, and sometimes I feel satisfied, and sometimes it doesn't feel satisfactory enough, having noticed it. And yeah, so.
Okay. So, um, one of the things that I would put back in there, because you haven't mentioned it, I'll put it in, is to keep taking deep breaths.
Mm-hmm.
That let the breath itself be satisfying.
So as far as the breathing, the the breathing usually starts to feel more satisfying when it's becomes shorter. So I mean
What do you
it
mean by the word short?
lighter, just kind of do very just kind of peaceful. Whereas if it's like a longer breath, I mean it depends. It's not always one or the other. But
Okay.
I'd
Well, you do
say.
know that you have the ability to mix it and mix and match. So if you're having that kind of breath and you become dissatisfied, then that's the time to reemphasize the deep breathing.
Okay.
You come back and start taking those deep breaths because generally um, the mind goes, especially after its beginning training, the mind is most likely to go into hindrance, especially the hindrance of doubt or drowsiness, is
Mm-hmm.
because we're more satisfied with the breath than getting enough. Because it's almost like that we're lazy. We're not putting in just the right amount of effort into the breathing. That
Mm-hmm.
the breathing has to remain conscious. It has to remain intentional. And because the body on its own generally will shut down because it's just simply more convenient to do that. It's a state of rest that the body mind complex goes into,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't go into it in a wholesome way.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's actually kind of a shutdown. Uh, One of the ways of understanding that is that when the body is not getting enough air or enough oxygen in the blood, then the body management system has to decide what it's going to do with the blood. An example of that is eating food. If we eat food, then it's difficult to go right in and do heavy labor, that it takes a few minutes for digestion because all the blood's in the stomach. They especially recommend don't go swimming until 30 minutes after you've
All
eaten.
right. Mm-hmm.
Same thing is true for practicing anapanasati. They serve the meal and then it's an hour later before the meditation class starts
Right.
again.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So knowing that and knowing that this automatic mechanism is there, if the body doesn't have adequate air, there is one part of the body that uses a huge amount of oxygen and energy to operate, and that is the part that's shut down first. And
Mm-hmm.
when it's shut down, it's hard for people to recognize that it's shut down because it's the recognition system that gets shut down,
Mm-hmm.
the frontal cortex. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like a supercomputer that does not run on batteries. It's got to have the power, but the laptop has got its own battery. So when the power goes off, the mainframes stop
Mm-hmm.
functioning, but the laptop will continue on because it's got battery backup. That's one of the ways to look at it as the analogy. And so this is why it's important for those who are practicing anapanasati to continue to incorporate step one of anapanasati is to
Mm-hmm.
keep doing it, to understand that this is a long breath and that it's an in breath
Mm-hmm.
and that it's an out breath and that it's a long out breath. This is, in
Mm-hmm.
fact, two different points for sati.
Mm-hmm.
The sati, this is an in breath and it's long. And then the sati is this is an out breath and it's long. So we have two opportunities for sati with each breath.
Yeah, so what will sometimes happen once I'm fairly, you know, into a sit and the breath starts to become shorter, if I do decide to take a long breath, and which I have because I've experimented on different occasions, is that it will feel like more uncomfortable, like there's tightness in the body, like the body feels like I don't want to expand out that way. I want to stay nice and you
This
know.
is why it's a skill to be developed, and it does take some effort to do this.
Okay.
But part of the change then is the change of the attitude rather than I don't like it and I don't want to do this. We
Mm-hmm.
can see those sensations in the body with the frontal cortex of the mind because we've got the thing going. And we can say, yeah, look, this is actually deep breathing is kind of an exercise for the body. It strengthens the diaphragm, it
Okay.
strengthens those muscles that are moving the ribs in and out.
Okay.
And that breathing, by the way, is done on a vacuum, not on pressure. When you take an in breath, that in breath is done by creating a cavity or a spaciousness in the chest
Mm-hmm.
that then the air comes through the nostrils or the mouth in to fill it up to keep the air pressure equalized,
Mm-hmm.
which is exactly opposite of what a ventilator does when people are on Corona 19. In fact, that's what this is the reason is why so few people come off of that ventilator once they go on it. And that
Mm-hmm.
is that now the air is pushed into the lungs
Mm-hmm.
rather
Yeah.
than by the machine, rather than having the chest system. Maybe what they need to do is to, in fact, they think they had it. It was called an iron lung. Way back in the old days, they put the whole body into this machine, and the
Mm-hmm.
breathing was helped by pulling the air out of the machine, which the head was still sitting on the outside, which means that they actually helped breathing the right way. But
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen an iron lung since the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
And
So
they're
I think,
using respirators instead.
yeah. So I think part of my reasoning for asking this question and whatnot is some teachers seem to emphasize like finding a comfortable breath, and so that sort of movement which then creates discomfort seems like problematic, and so
Okay. I understand that comfort seeking,
uh-huh.
but that the comfort can also be had in the sense of doing both of them. In
Mm-hmm.
other words, not breathing and trying to find comfort. And if you do so, then the mind is likely to get sleepy, drowsy, or return to hindrances.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can, in fact, get the deep breath, and be satisfied and comfortable that you're exercising the lungs and that you're in charge, that you don't have to let the lungs be in charge finding a comfortable place, that
Mm-hmm.
your mind is in the comfortable place
Mm-hmm.
because we're continuing to breathe. Now, this also is a really excellent teacher, because when we're not breathing deeply, that means that the mind has wandered away from the breath.
Mm-hmm.
But if the breath gets comfortable, we kind of think we're watching the breath, but we're in fact we're not really.
Mm.
And so it's actually kind of a sloppy way. And that we know where this comes from. It comes out of the Visuddhimagga.
Mm.
But in the tradition in Thailand, um, they don't hold so much stock in the Visuddhimagga because it's a 5th century AD piece of literature,
Mm-hmm.
and it's suspicious. I won't go into the details as to why it's suspicious,
Mm-hmm.
but a better way to practice is, instead of trying to incorporate later literature into the suttas, the better thing to do is let's just stay with the suttas.
Mm-hmm.
The Buddha
Well,
does not say it that way. He says, understand the in breath as as an in breath, and the long breath is a long breath.
mm-hmm.
Okay, so we work with the long breath like that, and it in fact now it does become comfortable
Mm-hmm.
because we like it every time we remember to take a deep breath. We
Mm-hmm.
really begin to like it. It's a really good breath. It's a comfortable breath. You're looking at it in the sense of every breath being that long, deep breath. And I'm saying, no, not everyone is going to be that way because the mind does wander away.
Mm-hmm.
But we can remember often to take that deep breath,
Mm-hmm.
to take the long, deep breath, making sure that we're continuing to get the mind fresh. So, in this regard, by having enough of the long, deep breaths, then we have enough oxygen so that we can now uh, the, the the hindrances don't come back
Mm-hmm.
and the drowsiness doesn't come back. And what that is left then with is a bright mind
Yeah.
that
So
is fit for work.
so times in the past where I've been really free of the hindrances and my mind has been um, effortlessly locked onto the breath, almost as if the breath was a magnet, just attracting my attention to it. In those situations, the breath was always short and peaceful, um, and definitely not long,
Okay.
or deep for that matter. It was always um, light, shallow, light.
Okay.
Um, so.
All right. So, taking the more deep breath approach, doing it
Mm-hmm.
often,
Mm-hmm.
then has benefits to it, including the fact that we begin to get comfortable and, in fact, really enjoying it because we know that it's beneficial. We know that it's healthy, and we know that, in fact, even though there is tightness in the chest,
Mm-hmm.
by breathing deeply into that, that starts to interrupt that tightness, that we
Mm-hmm.
can become free of that tightness so that we really do enjoy that big, deep, long breath. And so this is a way to we begin to look at it, is that it becomes very satisfying,
Mm-hmm.
but it needs a bit of practice. It needs some effort. But once we put the effort into it, now the next point is that when the Buddha is talking about it, only that we need to know that it's an in breath. Note that much. And then only to note that it's an out breath and it's a long breath. That means that between each in breath, the new in breath, and that cycle of an in and out breath, there is ample opportunity to use the mind for other things other than on the breath.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people get too stuck on the breath, where in fact there's a lot of work that we need to do. Anapanasati has 16 stages to it, and the breath is just step one.
Mm-hmm.
So the next thing that we would do if we, after we're beginning to take a deep breath, is that we begin to experience the effect that that deep breath has on the body.
Mm-hmm.
An example with that is that we sometimes, if we're doing it well, we begin to feel lightheaded and tingling. And so we notice that. We notice what the body feels like. We begin to notice the rising and falling of the abdomen and the chest. We can feel the flanks on the side. We can feel it sometimes in the shoulders. There's all kinds of body feelings. And by getting in touch with the feelings of the body associated with the breath,
Mm-hmm.
we also begin to get, let us say, a bit familiar and start to wake up to the emotions that are stored in the body.
Mm-hmm.
Anxiety, tension, tightness, other things like that. And by breathing into them, we begin to break up that emotional stuff. And the breaking it up means that stuff is going back into the bloodstream rather than getting parked at various places. And then when we do a good deep out breath, then much of that garbage then is exhaled on the out breath.
Mm-hmm.
It's remarkable how much stuff comes out of the body through the breathing process.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the coronavirus they found was spread wildly in Seattle because of a choir group. They were literally singing on each other,
Mm.
which means that during the singing, the body was expelling a whole lot of stuff out of the lungs, including the virus and stuff that's actually much smaller,
Mm-hmm.
like um, the stuff that comes out of the blood. An
Mm-hmm.
example of that would be amino acids.
Mm-hmm.
Even adrenaline will break down into amino acids and then it's dispersed through the lungs if we're breathing well. But if we're not breathing very well, then that kind of stuff kind of stays in the blood.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a physiological way of looking at why we become dissatisfied by being sedentary. The answer is because we're not getting enough oxygen and we're not purifying the body enough.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that I've been noticing when I am taking deep breaths is a sensation. It's inside of my head, in the central sort of region. Feels like a crinkling or a very light crackling. It's pleasant. It's not. It's definitely not unpleasant. It's a little bit pleasant.
Okay.
Um, so anything, should I focus on it or accentuate it or anything special or?
I would say the right way to handle it is by playing with it, which means try any and all of those things. Yeah. Look at
Okay.
it, see if you can make it bigger or smaller. You can do that with any part of the body. But if it's in the head and it's very pleasurable,
Mm-hmm.
then you know what you want to do with it. And that if you've got it by having some deep breathing, then that should be an incentive to continue deep breathing because you
Mm-hmm.
really like it. Okay.
Okay.
That
And
we
then,
really are looking for a sense of pleasure.
mm-hmm.
That's the word satisfaction. Satisfaction is actually a pleasurable state.
Right. And then I'll also here in between my eyebrows, I sometimes notice a vibration. Um, and when it appears, I like that it's there, but then I get like afraid of being attached to it. Like, oh, don't you know, don't get your hopes up about this sensation being here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the right approach. If maybe I should be get more joyful about it having appeared or something.
Yeah, let it be.
Yeah.
Now, here's something that's quite amusing, and that it happens generally to practitioners or practitioners when they're working too hard and expecting too much.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, without their complete sati, complete awareness of what's going on, they will kind of give up on working too hard and fall into a deep momentary state of satisfaction
Mm-hmm.
that they think is a satori or something, but it's a really nice state that they fall into as opposed to develop skillfully. And so now the next time they come to practice or later, now they're trying to redo that
Right.
without really knowing how they got it in the first place. So
Mm-hmm.
now they're struggling really hard to try to get some state that they don't have. Okay. But you're not doing it like that. What you're doing is you're afraid to enjoy something that's happening now because you might want it later.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you can come to the position of, oh no, when it's not there, I can handle that too. But right now, while it's there, I'm going to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can inspect it. I can play with it. I
Mm-hmm.
can investigate,
Mm-hmm.
find out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
That's the right way of approaching is let me take a look at that. Or in a non-Buddhist way, you could keep saying, hold my beer.
Okay.
You know what I mean by that. All
Yeah.
right. That here's a situation to be taken care of. We
Uh-huh.
can do this.
Uh-huh.
Because that quality of hold my beer means I'm going to take care of this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's the way that we begin to practice with that attitude of being a winner.
Mm-hmm.
And that attitude of being a winner comes from having put in the right effort to get the job done. And once we get the job done, now we're satisfied with it. But you see, if the beginner practices on trying to find a comfortable breath, he will not get that state of satisfaction nor the feeling of being a winner. But he also is in great danger of having the mind go into a state of hindrance. And one of those would be doubt, the other would be um,
Oh.
drowsiness. But it can also put us into a state of just restless mind because we're not really getting any benefit out of this, even though the breathing is comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But in the kind that we're doing here, oh no, the breathing is actually quite possibly at least the second most important thing that we're doing. Because if we cannot get the body oxygenated and cannot get that frontal cortex in firing good order, then it's hard to get the mind fit for work.
Mm-hmm.
And so deep breathing is really, really valuable to get the mind fit for work and also to clean out all of the garbage that's built up in the blood. And when you do it, even though there's tightness of the chest, you can say, yeah, I can see that tightness of the chest. And it's good that I'm playing with that tightness of the chest. Let me take the next breath and breathe back into that tightness again.
Okay.
So that we're not really looking for a comfortable breath. What we're looking for is a more broad, comfortable experience.
Okay.
And that broad, comfortable experience has to do with being oxygenated Yeah, I like that one. I just saw
Yeah. Yeah. All
that.
right.
Okay, so this is the way that we're going to work, is that it is satisfying. That's part of the job that's to be done, is to clean the hindrances out and get the mind free from hindrances so that we have enough time to really do a really full investigation. One of the parts of that full investigation is that while I'm breathing deeply and sitting here in a state of satisfaction, I'm only going to allow thoughts to come in that are going to maintain that.
Mm-hmm.
So most of our thinking has to do about the Dhamma and about this present moment, because the things that are unwholesome will become hindrances in the sense of the past or the future or being dissatisfied with what we're doing. So we begin to practice being satisfied. We practice keeping the mind corralled, onto the into the pasture, and not into the desert.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so this is the what we're doing with that time. Then is the part of that cycle that we're not actually noting that it's an in breath, but we're also noting what the mind is doing. We're also beginning to note what kind of anxieties or anything that comes up that would take us out of a state of satisfaction. Now, here's the point. If we are already in a state of dissatisfaction and we're not practicing sati, then when more dissatisfaction comes, it just piles on and we're stuck in it. We are, in fact, that dissatisfaction. The example is that someone is in a train car and they're riding in the train and they can see out the window, but until they step out of the train, they don't see the whole train. You have to not just step out of it, you got to step back from it so that you can see the engine up there and the caboose down there. We're taking a larger view. So we're also taking that larger view of the mind to begin to see the locomotive and the caboose and the sleeping cars, the dining cars, all of that kind of stuff, rather than merely stuck in whatever place the mind is in. That you are not the thought. You're the watcher of the thought, or you're the one who wakes up to that thinking and decides to make choices about it. So that now you're the boss of this mental contraption.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This changes the attitude from being the attitude of a winner or the attitude of a loser into the attitude of the winner. We do, you've heard me say, I think, before, that everyone is an emperor of their own pile of dirt.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, are you going to be buried under it?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you going to be sitting on top of it? Well, that choice needs to be made almost with every breath. I'm the winner here. I'm the emperor. I'm the boss.
Mm-hmm.
The shallow breath is not the boss.
Mm-hmm.
The wandering mind is not the boss. But I'm the boss here, and I can
Mm-hmm.
feel and think and do what I want to do with this present moment. And
Mm-hmm.
that's marvelous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes what I've been doing when I notice that there's aversion, um, or dullness for that matter, is that it appears in the sensations of the body, and so then I start to identify with space, like the totality of space, or I'll sink my attention into the emptiness of like the air in front of me, and that is nice. To not have to identify with the unpleasant sensations in the body, that I can just, be something bigger.
Yes, you can
Um,
put your mind where you want to put it.
yeah, yeah.
And there's also advantage to, in a very satisfying way, take a look at whatever that knot or point is. A way of talking about it would be to look at it and breathe into it. So if there's tightness in the chest, And that's a place where most people will experience anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Is in the middle part of the chest. And so breathing into those feelings will
Mm-hmm.
help break them up.
Mm-hmm.
Letting the body, that part of the body move through the breathing, as well as uh, by oxygenating the blood, the whole blood chemistry of the body begins to change.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're practicing Anapanasati correctly,
Mm-hmm.
body chemistry changes remarkably.
Mm-hmm.
More serotonin and dopamine are in the mind. The body has less adrenaline. It has less cortisol. It has a whole lot of different things happening. The pH level of the body of the blood changes,
Mm-hmm.
and so many good attributes is part of the practice,
Mm-hmm.
and part then of your job of investigation is to investigate this, begin to see that all the body is feeling better now
Mm-hmm.
by having all of that breath, that it
Mm-hmm.
becomes tingly alive.
Mm-hmm. A couple of days ago, I was drawn to doing more of a formal metta sort of practice. And yeah, I guess I just wanted to get your take on it.
That's what we are doing. It's just a different label for it and a slightly different method, but we are practicing metta.
The way that I conceptualize the intentions are different from when I'm doing metta versus anapanasati. Um,
All right. So
there's more.
let's integrate those, because in fact
Okay.
they're the same thing.
Right.
Uh,
Well, so for example, when I'm doing anapanasati, I'm the intentions in my mind are keeping the breath in mind, um, having a sense of the body, space. When I notice hindrances, taking satisfaction in the noticing and gladdening the mind, smiling. But when I'm practicing metta, it's maybe I'm using my voice more, of like
you're
I'm set
saying you're
like
saying
I'm
it out
like
loud, or
no,
you're
no,
talking
no, not
about
out loud, in
okay,
my head.
okay, okay.
I'm sending, like, wish myself well. I'm sending kindness into my heart. There's more focus on the heart area, and the sensations there. Um, Usually when I'm practicing Anapanasati, I'm more loose with where I'm keeping my attention. Sometimes it's at the nose, sometimes it's at the chest or the stomach. Sometimes I move my attention from the perineum up through the body. Just
Okay.
depending on what I'm feeling, or uh, so.
Okay. There, the way that metta is often taught is in kind of a sing-songy mantra.
Mm-hmm.
May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from suffering, or things
Mm-hmm.
like this. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, Basically, it there's two things about it. One thing is that it's future oriented.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
Love.
I've changed the way that I do it now. I do it
Mhm.
now, so I make it active, where I am sending kindness to myself right now.
Okay, right. That's exactly what we're talking. That's anapanasati,
Right.
but
Okay.
that's not classical way that metta is being taught. Yes,
Mhm.
start sending yourself kindness right now, and that kindness is in fact the attitude of I can do this. What a nice, kind thing to say to yourself is I
Okay.
can do this. I can practice this. I can generate enough joy. I can manufacture enough joy to share it with others.
Mm-hmm.
Not by the teaspoonful, but I need a backhoe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A what? A backhoe?
Yeah, a backhoe. You know,
Uh,
one of those big machines that has a really, really big scoop or a spoon. Okay,
yeah.
I'm not going to give my Metta out with a teaspoon. They
Right.
all be happy means everybody gets a tiny little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but everybody that I'm around gets a bucket load of it. One of those big buckets on the backhoe.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this is a way of beginning to incorporate metta and anapanasati, that they're not
Mm-hmm.
separate practices,
Mm-hmm.
they're just separate approaches
Okay.
to the same practice.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that would be with anapanasati, you could in fact start to limit the kind of words that you're going to allow in anapanasati to fit in with the role model of metta.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that the kind of thoughts that you're going to have are going to be very wholesome thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is really nice. Oh, wait till I share this. Oh, wow, this is going to be all of the bars will close when they hear me. So this is a way of beginning to incorporate those two things,
Mm-hmm.
is by beginning to use metta as a way of limiting the mind so that you're only going to allow wholesome thoughts in.
Mm-hmm.
This way, more of an integrated practice, because the outcome of the metta, um, how to say, metta by and of itself basically means friendliness
Yes. Yeah.
or kindness.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have not just metta, but karuna, which is compassion.
Mm-hmm.
But compassion, actually, in another respect, is one's right noble view. One's right noble view is to see other people and see their suffering or see
Mm-hmm.
their dukkha without having to buy into it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the other one is pity, which means when I see you in a state of deprivation, suffering, or unhappiness, I want to help you out of it so I don't have to feel bad.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the
Mm-hmm.
way that the old rich lady does her generosity, is because she feels bad when other people hurt. So
Right.
she gives them relief so that she can have relief.
Mm-hmm.
But noble right view, in fact, is just seeing the suffering of other people, or seeing the misery, or seeing the dissatisfaction directly, without having um, that disturb your quality of metta. Or, in fact, the third one is uh, mudita,
Mm-hmm.
and mudita is, in fact, what they mean by sympathetic joy. Now, I have heard it both ways. I would say that the lower level, or the religious way, is to take your joy wherever you may find it.
Mm-hmm.
But this is not like that. The other way is, oh no, my job is to go manufacture that joy, not seek it out in others, but to
Mm-hmm.
get that joy myself so that I can spread that joy to others.
Mm-hmm.
That it's a different direction for
Mm-hmm.
that joy to go. So now you begin to have an obligation to spread the joy.
Mm.
That's a way of looking at it. And in fact, this is also what we mean by paying it forward, or we
Mm-hmm.
can call it generosity. And the
Mm-hmm.
generosity is more of a generosity of feelings and a generosity of spirit rather than a generosity of money.
Mm-hmm.
But the generosity of spirit is that whenever Dhamma dude who has joy runs across some misery guts, he's going to play with them.
Runs across some what?
A misery gut.
A Mizragot?
Oh, you haven't. That's an old Southern American expression.
Oh, okay.
Okay, someone Someone who is complaining.
Okay, someone who's miserable.
Yeah, somebody who is complaining about being miserable, where in fact they probably are not. They're just in the habit of complaining.
Mm.
All right. So, in fact, in that regard, that's also part of the anapanasati practice, is to see mentally when we're complaining,
Yeah.
so that we can come out of complaining. That everything is good like it is. Why have I got complaints? I don't got any complaints.
Mm-hmm.
Things are good like they are.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the way that we incorporate all of the practice of metta, especially the mudita, is that we spread the joy, and you can spread that joy just by thinking about it while you're sitting. Wow, this is so nice. I've got to show it to others.
Mm.
This is really good stuff. Okay, so this is the kind of an attitude that we begin to have.
Mm-hmm.
But that attitude doesn't develop unless we've got our own satisfaction as a bud or a kernel. That in
Mm-hmm.
fact, this is one of the ways of growing that satisfaction, is by having the idea that this is so good I got to go share it
Mm-hmm.
with others. That metta and joy are like how to say it? They're noble
Mm-hmm.
in this regard. Fire is noble. Information and knowledge is noble. Joy is noble.
Mm-hmm.
Money is not noble. Why? Because if I give you 100 euros or $100, I don't have it. It's a zero-sum game.
Mm-hmm.
But with noble actions, it's not a zero-sum game. It's a win-win or a win-win-win situation where everybody gains, everybody gets benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So fire is like that. That you can, one candle will light another candle, but where's the fire now?
Mm-hmm.
Which Okay, if fire is the self, for instance, you got one candle. When that candle then lights another candle, is it the same fire
Mm-hmm.
as it was before it lit that second candle? The answer is clearly both yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
So, one more candle and one more candle and one more candle. All we need is the spark, and then the Dhamma will grow. And this is part of the intention, is to let's keep this teaching of the Buddha alive by spreading it joyfully.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to practice joy
Mm-hmm.
because we're not in the habit of being joyful.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Okay. So, in that regard, you can see, well, maybe I can incorporate metta practice and anapanasati because they
Mm-hmm.
are, in fact, having the same goal with the same intention. It's just a different kind of approach. And so you can play with the approach. You can cut even a third or fourth door in that building if you want to. You can find all kinds of ways of getting into it.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So next time, I think that we need to talk about how to bring you off of the sit into living your Dhamma.
Yeah, so we actually didn't get a chance to talk about it, but I've been doing the Nosferatu hands and the standing and sitting into the chair. The one, if you have the time, the one question that I have about all of that is if while I'm sitting in the chair, I'm already aware of why I'm getting up, do I still need to stand for a moment?
Yes, that standing is
Yes.
interrupting that process.
Well, that's what
That moment of standing, that interrupts the process. Because see, normally when people get out of the chair, they get out of the chair with the intention of going. And so
uh-huh.
they come out of the chair walking.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So even if we think that we're completely, I've got it before I get out of the chair,
Right.
that standing and stopping will in fact start pointing out to you how often that you're getting out of the chair intentionally without sati.
Okay. All right.
Okay. This is that one of those things that we would call an anchor.
Right.
Let that stand be standing up between your sitting down and your walking.
Mm-hmm.
Let that be your anchor. That you,
Okay.
it's a must do. You'll find that that you actually forget quite often.
Yeah. No, I have been forgetting here and there. But
Well,
yeah.
never mind. Start again.
Yeah, exactly. All right. All right. Well, thank you for talking to me.
I've enjoyed it too.
So I guess I can give you another call in a couple of days or so, or a
Okay,
few days.
great.
Okay.
We'll see you later, David.
All righty. All right. Take care. Bye bye.
Okay, bye bye.